Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker, and welcome to the race recap episode for the Darlington Throwback weekend in the Goodyear 400 for the NASCAR Cup Series. It's Throwback weekend, ladies and gentlemen. What a weekend it was at Darlington Raceway, where we had three different winners, obviously, in the three different series, and we had a dominating performance, specifically in the NASCAR Cup Series here from none other than Martin Truex Jr. We'll look at that, as well as the notable finishers from today's race. And we have, of course, our driver of the day, and we'll give this thing a rating at the end of this one. But before we get into the actual race itself, just quickly, a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, specifically my mom as well, and on behalf of Kyle as well to his mom and all the mothers out there. It's obviously a great day for them. So shout out to all the moms out there, and they put on a show out there for the drivers for the mothers today at Darlington Raceway. And that was basically a dominating performance by none other than Martin Truex Jr. His third win of the season, held off Kyle Larson in the closing laps. Dominating performance. He led 248 of the 293 laps from today's race. It was just from start to finish. This was Martin Truex Jr.'s race to lose, and he did not lose at this time, despite the fact that no previous winner in the stage era in the NASCAR Cup Series had gone on to win after sweeping the stages at Darlington, and that's exactly what Martin Truex Jr. did today. So he made a little bit of history, rewriting the history books for himself there, and he scores the victory there, his second career victory at the track. Too tough to tame, the Lady in Black, so many different nicknames for this thing, and he managed to get ahead of the pack really early on and kind of set the pace from there. Didn't get challenged too much from behind. Had a couple of moments there, specifically in the late going there, where Kyle Larson looked like he could challenge, but the 19 car held off all threats that were coming from behind him to win today's race in the Furniture Row-esque throwback paint scheme. Painted it matte black with Auto Owners as the sponsor. A little bit disappointing that that's the throwback scheme that won, but nonetheless, still a throwback scheme if you want to classify it as that. But still a good-looking race car, and Martin Truex Jr. was looking good out front in this one, and people had plenty of time to enjoy it. He got up to about 12-plus second leads at points in time throughout this race, even more, if I can recall correctly. So he was just on rails today, and he just once again proves on this 750 horsepower package that he is the driver to beat this season, with all three of his victories, the series leading 3 victories over his competition, with his nearest rival only having 1, and that includes I guess 9 other competitors out there now. So it's just unbelievable what the 19 car has been able to accomplish so far on these specific tracks, and that bodes well for him if he can make a long run into the playoffs, and specifically getting into that championship finale at Phoenix come November. Of course, he won the spring race there as well. So there's a lot of stuff on the 19 car side to go deep into this season with a championship shot. And he is for sure the championship favorite based off of everything that we've seen so far. He can make a run at this regular season championship, given how strong he is on road courses as well. He's just an all-around threat. And we're seeing a resurgence here for Martin Truex Jr. After only having the 1 victory in 2020. So he's back to his Furniture Row racing days, and he certainly did look like that with that paint scheme as well up there. So congratulations to Martin Truex Jr. Dominating performance, no other way to put it. 30th win of his career as well. So he's definitely, after a slow start to his career, not getting the breaks that he needed to, he has definitely emerged as a NASCAR Hall of Famer here once his career is all said and done. Of course, a Cup Series champion, as well as 30 wins in this sport, is nothing to be short of amazing, really. So props to Martin Truex Jr., James Small as well, just really starting to click, those two. It seems like they're maybe getting back to a little bit of what MTJ had with Cole Pearn in their kind of championship era there, where they were just on fire for basically every other weekend. It felt like he was just dominating like this, where he could just fly out in front of the pack and nobody really was in the same zip code as him. But yeah, once again, let's preface, Martin Truex Jr., congratulations on your victory in today's race. Of course, as I mentioned, throwback weekend. what a spectacular weekend this really is. It was the first time that Fox ever broadcasted this throwback weekend. Of course, it is traditionally, since it originated back, I believe, in 2015. It's always been traditionally the later race at Darlington. And this is the first time that we've had two races at Darlington in a long time on the Cup Series calendar, apart from last year, of course, where we had to make some scheduling changes due to the pandemic. But this year, where it's all set in stone with nothing really happening to the schedule itself, this is the first time we've seen Darlington with two races for quite some time. So Fox gets the throwback weekend this time around, compared to NBC, who usually does it on the Labor Day weekend. But now that race is the playoff opener, sponsors and the TV itself want to make sure that that is a playoff race and that it isn't overshadowed as much with a throwback. So it makes each race at Darlington Raceway this season at the utmost importance for both the driver and for the fan at home. You get to experience the best of both worlds and make each Darlington race that much more special than what that track really already is in NASCAR history. So yeah, lots of great throwback schemes out there on the track this entire weekend. If you hadn't checked out the preview episode, I gave my top 5, and the most disappointing one was in the actual Cup Series race with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But my top 5 was really great. I had my one Cup Series car wrecked before the first 10 laps were all said and done. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. So unfortunate there on that end that the Cup Series car that I like the most did not make it that long into this event itself. But nonetheless, great throwback schemes out there. Chase Elliott's Hooter scheme. Honestly, I have to give that one another shout out because that car looks so good in the daytime here today. I can't imagine what it would look like under the lights. And the throwback schemes did well, taking up the top 8 positions there. So that feels good, at least for a throwback event such as this, that none of the the party poopers, I guess, really got into it and, kind of battled their way up there and got a victory or a solid finish per se, because they didn't take part in the throwback weekend here. That's the most important thing. You want to see the teams get into it. They certainly did. Special shout out to also Corey LaJoie. Awesome tribute to Alan Kulwicki, as that was mentioned in the broadcast by Mike Joy, which I'll talk about in a second as well. Just all around, what a performance by Corey LaJoie, both on and off the track this weekend. Paying tribute to Kulwicki in an original fire suit as well before the race. Of course, can't wear that actually during the race itself due to technology advancements with the fire suit. But nonetheless, it still looked pretty cool that LaJoie got that into it. And that's what you want to see as a race fan. So just a special shout out to those guys and basically anybody that took part. And it's just a spectacular event. One of my personal favorites of the entire season. Just seeing all these classic schemes that I maybe haven't been exposed to as a newer generation of fan, if you want to call it that. I'm 20 years old, so I haven't seen the historical paint schemes as much, the 80s, the 90s and all that, because that was obviously before I was born. But just great to see that historical significance of the sport coming back to the current day. And that's honestly what this throwback weekend is all about. So for Fox's first time doing the throwback weekend, I'll give them credit. Like, they did a pretty decent job. I thought, I wish they could go a little bit further with maybe some old school graphics and whatnot, but that is quite the time investment and money investment as well to get that up and running for just one race itself. But a guy can dream, I guess, because I'm just a sucker for the old Fox graphics package. But I'm happy that they changed at least the numbers on the side for the running scoreboard there. So props to them for that. Obviously, they got into it with the looks as well, with the on-air personalities, with the booth guys, and of course the pit reporters there with Jamie Little and Regan Smith. They all did a masterful job in terms of bringing the look of an old era to the current generation. And of course, we got to give a shout out to the people back at the Fox studios there in Charlotte with Larry Mack, Shannon Spake, and of course, Jamie McMurray. So they all got dressed up, especially Larry Mack. You expect that. What a character that guy is. And just wanted to give them a special shout out, specifically Mike Joy here. I think he made this weekend, specifically, obviously, the Cup Series race, just that much more special. And his uncanny ability to tell stories and just his recollection of the sport and just his knowledge and his in-depth knowledge of this sport is truly remarkable. And that's what really lacked previously with the NBC broadcast. And I'm not the biggest fan of Rick Allen. I think many people are in agreement with me that I think that there are better options out there. Alan Bestwick, but nonetheless, I think Mike Joy's experience with the sport, how much he's been around this sport, his longevity in this sport is just second to none. And the stories that he was able to tell specifically about Alan Kulwicki, very heartfelt, got choked up in the pre-race when he mentioned his name. It's just those kind of things like that where we see these grassroots moments and see these special moments. And that's what Throwback Weekend is really all about, paying homage to the people that, trailblaze this sport prior to the current generation here, and hopefully the future generations from here will pay tribute to not only the current era that we're watching right now, but also those areas that the current generation is paying tribute to. So I wanted to give a special shout out to Mike Joy, and not to say that Cliff Boyer or Jeff Gordon were bad, but they even joked about it themselves. They wouldn't know what they would do without Mike Joy in these broadcasts, and I think they're honestly right. I'm glad that they gave him the respect he definitely deserves. So credit to Mike Joy and the entire broadcasting team for a very solid first go around at the Throwback Weekend. Looking forward to it once again next year at Darlington Raceway. But the overall story of this race, of course, coming out of it is this is a 750 horsepower package compared to this 551 that we experienced 3 times here at this track last season. And it's leaving some people up in the air on terms of their opinions on, do they like the 750 or do they like the 550 here at Darlington? And honestly, I'm kind of mixed because, last year we had 3 attempts at this package at this track, and 2 of them probably were more successful than the other. The first race back from the pandemic, of course, this was that track that made NASCAR's historic return from the pandemic, was okay. It wasn't too bad. But then the second race, kind of that midweek race there where we saw the Chase Elliott and Kyle Busch incident late in the going before it got rain kind of canceled there with about 25 laps to go, if I can recall correctly. And then, of course, the playoff opener there with Chase Elliott and Martin Truex Jr. battling for the lead and taking each other out in the closing laps. That's just must-watch TV. And that was the Throwback Weekend as well. So there was a little bit more added significance to that event itself. But for me, this race was pretty solid. I'll give an overall rating at the end of this episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But for the race itself, I thought that it was just great to see the cars slipping and sliding. And I think we take that for granted a little bit because the 550 horsepower package, sure, it can provide some close racing, but it is manufactured at the end of the day. And it makes everything much closer than what in reality it should be. Racing should really reward the teams and the drivers who bring the best car in the weekend. And, the driver itself behind the wheel has a say and the overall determining factor of the race. Not to say that they don't in the 550, of course they do, but for 750 races, they are just on another level in terms of how much the driver can control, how much happens to them in this race and what goes right, what goes wrong. And I thought, we clearly saw that Martin Truex Jr. is very comfortable with this package. A lot of guys were, and I just thought the race today was pretty solid. And, of course, there's going to be dull moments. You can't have a banger every single lap, but it's good to have something like that every once in a while. And maybe just sounds like, I'm playing bias to the 750 package, which I would prefer, which is true. Of course, I would prefer more horsepower and the guys being a little bit more out of control and on the edge of spinning out and just battling their car to the absolute extreme. But at the same time, this package is just so good when it gets it right. And while that may not have been the case today to its full extent, I still believe that the 750 horsepower package long-term for this sport is much better off than the 550, especially with this new generation of car coming in that was announced over this week. And we saw what the actual bodies are going to look like. We'll see what the package looks like for next year, eventually down the line once they do some more testing with the car itself. But I'm hopeful that NASCAR doesn't shy away from the 750 horsepower package due to a quote unquote duller race, if you want to call it that, just because of how much Martin Truex Jr. was able to extend that gap. But traditionally here at Darlington, it is difficult to pass. And I don't know if any package is really going to solve that issue at this specific racetrack. So I think you have to, take it with a grain of salt, the results of this race and how it really progressed as the event went on. But overall, I can't really be upset with the actual on-track product. But for the 550 package here last year, it was pretty good. I think it probably was a better overall race compared to this one. But I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily prefer it here at Darlington, because this track itself, really, you get to see the cars on edge. It's Reddick up against the wall, and shout out to Fox for showing the throttle traces in this one as well in graphical form, where we could see that the ghost car from last year's speed and just how much more on throttle time and how much quicker they were back onto the throttle and how much more power they had on the throttle, which is the most important part, for a longer period of time throughout the corners, which resulted in faster lap times. Because at the end of the day, when you have lower downforce and you have higher horsepower, of course, the cars are going to be more out of control. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how NASCAR really handles this from here, because this racetrack and this package itself, I think, has a lot of potential. And while that may not have been the case entirely today, I wouldn't write it off just yet. And I don't know. I think 550 is a little bit overrated to an extent, but then 750 may is just, the nostalgic in me in terms of loving the higher horsepower kind of cars that I grew up watching in this sport. So there's a lot of varying of opinions on this one. On our poll on our Instagram story, we have 60% said yes, this was a good race. 40% said no at the time I'm recording this. So you can just see the level of up in the air of uncertainty or indecisiveness amongst the fan base here, and what they would rather prefer, 550 or 750. So it's not quite a 50-50 split, but it's close enough to really decipher that NASCAR is in a little bit of a pickle here. So I don't know what the answer is if you're NASCAR, but if you look at this race entirely, I was pretty entertained by it, despite having the big lead that Truex got throughout the event. There was still some passing throughout the race, had some comers, had some goers, had some Darlington stripes. It was just an average, I would say even above average NASCAR race, if in my opinion. Just, I think the throwback element adds to it, of course, but I think the racing itself cannot be overlooked, that it was so boring that it was unwatchable. I thought it was still a pretty solid race throughout the field. Tire strategy, there's not really much of that here at Darlington, because you pit for 4 tires basically every single time there's a caution comes out, no matter how quick it was. But just overall, I thought the race was pretty solid. So that's my kind of gist of it in terms of the overall perspective of this event. And, looking forward to the playoff opener here at Darlington when that comes around in early September. So I think that'll do it for the actual race review part of this episode. I think it's time we look at the notable finishers of today's episode and look at these guys in a little bit more of an in-depth fashion here, specifically the notable finishers, as I mentioned. There's quite the varying degree from first all the way down to last, and we'll touch on a lot of guys throughout this here. So we talked about Martin Truex Jr. He's, of course, a notable finisher. You finish first, you do get a notable mention here for that. Second place, Kyle Larson suffered a speeding penalty early on, methodically worked his way back up through the running order, and was in contention there for the victory late on in the going in this one. Just didn't quite have the speed there to compete with the 19 car. Made it interesting, made it close at the end of it, but it is difficult to pass. And Larson even said in his post-race interview that he maybe could have passed the 19, but he wanted to see if he could make the 19 car burn his stuff up. And Martin Truex Jr. is a skilled veteran. Larson maybe should have known a little bit better to just strike while the iron's hot and not wait for that moment to maybe materialize, but he did end up doing that, and Truex, the savvy veteran that he is, ended up getting the best of Larson there. So solid day for Larson. Nice recovery drive after 3 consecutive poor finishes by his standards. Of course, dominated at Kansas, didn't quite get the finish there. Talladega finishing last in that one, and then Richmond, a very disappointing result on a similar package here, 750, but an entirely different kind of style of track. So 5 car back on track after a slow couple of weeks here. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do at Dover, of course, the site of his 42 win, his last Chip Ganassi win, if I'm not mistaken, as well, before everything that happened last year with the iRacing incident. So for Larson, really, really solid drive here, and what we expected from him coming into this weekend. Maybe didn't get the stage points that we were hoping for, just that with that speeding penalty kind of set him back, but gradually, methodically worked his way up to the field and got a second place result out of it. Third place, Kyle Busch. was in the lead pretty early on in this one before spinning with a flat tire. We aren't sure which one it was, either if it was left or right, but nonetheless, they were both flat by the time he got around to the pit. So he fell short by 1 lap of leading his 18,000 lap in the Cup Series. So going to have to wait another event for that one, for that milestone that is. And he recovered quite mightily, as I said, finishing third in this event. So you can't really feel too upset if you're Kyle Busch at this one, especially after saying, after hearing his comments last week after his victory at Kansas, where he talked about how this team is a little bit struggling on these 750 horsepower packages, but to get a top 5 finish here at Darlington, really, really solid result for the 18 car. Almost went a lap down at the end of stage 1 there, stayed ahead of the eventual race winner there at Martin Truex Jr. Heck of a job there by the 18 car to stay ahead there, and he ends up recovering there for a very solid top 5 finish here, and he's starting to get that momentum going there, starting to gel with him and Ben Beshore. So encouraging signs if you're a Kyle Busch fan like I am. So feeling good about this result after a hard-fought day at Darlington, and a well-deserved top 5 at that for him. Going back to 4th, Mr. Consistent, William Byron does it once again. He continues his streak of consecutive top 10 finishes, 10 consecutive races with the top 10 finish, and he ties Jeff Gordon's record here with Hendrick Motorsports with that number. That happened back in 2007, the first year I started watching the sport, funnily enough. So that was an impressive run, obviously, by Gordon. Then he got 30 top 10s in that season and fell short to Jimmy Johnson's masterclass in the final couple of races of the Chase back then. That was when it was called the Chase. I'm not messing up. It was called the Chase back then. So William Byron just continues to improve this season, and he's just knocking out all the numbers that we saw with the average finishes in most of these tracks this season. If they're in the mid-teens, excuse me, or even early 20s, don't even let that bother you right now if you're a William Byron fan, if you're looking for him in fantasy, because he is consistently putting in a shift, another top 5, and specifically another top 10 here, and was running there the entire day. Didn't have an issue. Didn't have top 3 speed. Those 3 cars at the front were probably the best 3 through the majority of the day. Larson just couldn't quite get the track position, but William Byron, top 5 car easily this entire race. So watch out for William Byron, because his consistency right now is off the chart. 3rd in the NASCAR Cup Series point standings as well. That is incredible, and he is taking those leaps and bounds that we expected from him maybe a little bit sooner, but he is definitely living up to that potential that we set out for him after rising through the ranks so quickly in the Truck Series and, of course, being an Xfinity Series champion. So congratulations to Byron on another top 10 and another top 5. Then we go back to 5th, Denny Hamlin. It was just an interesting top 5 for Hamlin. Was up in the front at the end of stage 1 there, finishing 2nd in that stage, and then ran about there for the most of the day in that top 5, that is. It wasn't too spectacular performance by the 11 car, but once again, another top 5 finish. That is his 9th on the season through the first 12 races. So just incredible pace. When he finishes inside the top 10, he is finished in the top 5. So, I mean, this, excuse me, but this guy is just on another level right now. He is completely far ahead in the actual regular season points, 75 points ahead of his nearest challenger, which is his teammate Martin Truex Jr. So, I mean, for Denny Hamlin, didn't have race-winning speed, but at the end of the day, another solid effort, and he'll look to continue that at Dover next weekend. Go back to 6th, Kevin Harvick. Up and down day for the 4 car. Started out strong in that first couple of laps there, took the lead before Kyle Busch passed him, and then from then on, seemed like he was in decent shape. Got some stage points, but then after that, the 4 car fell off massively at around the 2/3 part of this race, fell back into the mid-teens and was kind of stuck there, was mired back there in traffic, and didn't really get that opportunity to regain that track position by a lack of cautions, of course. So overall, a solid day for Kevin Harvick by his standards so far this season. They're starting to round into consistent form, not race-winning form yet that we saw last season, where he won 2 of these 3 races, let's not forget. So just a nice recovery drive nonetheless for Kevin Harvick to, propel himself up the running order. They'll end up going. Some guys had some miscues as well that he was able to capitalize on, which we'll talk about in a second here with some of these other finishers. But 6th place for Kevin Harvick in the Goodyear 400. Go back to the place behind him here. Chase Elliott, my race winner pick. started from the rear after failing pre-race inspection, and just didn't quite have the speed that I was expecting from that 9 car today. A little bit disappointing compared to what the pace we saw specifically last season, where he was basically in contention to win 2 of the 3 races for sure. So I don't know. I don't know what to think of the 9 car right now on these tracks besides the road course. Of course, we're going to see that in a couple weeks' time at COTA, where we get to go back to his bread and butter, really. But, you know, after failing pre-race inspection and having to come through the field, got up there in a decent amount of time. Of course, like I said, it is difficult to pass here at Darlington. So I was just a little bit disappointed from the speed that we saw from the 9 car. But another top 10, just a different package from last year. So maybe that was a little bit of misjudgment and misplacement in terms of expectations on my part for this one. But this is a track that he has done well in his career. So maybe we'll look back at this one and be like, man, maybe I should have used the Chase Elliott usage in fantasy, which, by the way, congratulations to Kyle. He goes 2 consecutive weekends here with a victory in fantasy. I just didn't quite have it this weekend. He had the pace and he had the luck with the drivers, and it all worked out for him very, very well. Made some good selections, and some of my guys had some rough days here at Darlington. So congratulations to Kyle, of course, on his fantasy victory this week. And for Chase Elliott, like I said, 7th place, solid run. Looking for a little bit better. We'll see if he can do that at Dover, a track that he's actually very good at as well. So that would be a good place for the 9 car to get his first victory of 2021. Behind him, one of his friends, Ryan Blaney. This was by far the best run of his career here at Darlington Raceway. He smacked the wall a little bit late in the going there. Probably would have had an even better finish if not for that unfortunate incident there for him. But you got to feel good if you're a Ryan Blaney fan to see this improvement compared to last season, where he has where he struggled at this track specifically. I was very impressed from Ryan Blaney's performance in this one, finishing 8th, and you know, that's a good sign of things to come. Specifically for the playoff race, that is, because that is the playoff opener. And we saw last year, Blaney got kicked out in the first round of the playoffs, despite having a decent cushion over that cut line coming into that playoff race. But then Richmond and Darlington really did him in. Richmond, I think I'm still a little bit more uncertain about in terms of his performance. But if he can back that up in the playoffs, get a solid top 10, top 12, I'm expecting maybe a win or 2 more from Ryan Blaney come the end of this regular season. So that should add to his playoff point total. But for Blaney himself, you have to feel good. It's improvement, and that's what you want to see from specifically that 12 team there at Team Penske. So behind him, 2 Fords. They'll bunch them in together here. Chris Buescher and Ryan Newman, because they had very similar storylines in this race. Consistent, underrated performances, of course, throughout the day. The broadcast didn't really touch on them too much, and that was unfortunate because this was one heck of a shift by both of these guys on Sunday afternoon here. As Chris Buescher, I think, was probably the most underrated driver. Newman very closely behind him there in terms of that category. Ran inside the top 15 the entire day. And you have to feel ecstatic if you're Roush Fenway Racing, getting 2 guys in the top 10 here at Darlington. That is usually dominated by the top guys. And that's just really impressive from them. Looking at the point standings quickly here, I mean, Chris Buescher is doing a pretty decent job here. If I can find him, 13th in the overall point standings, inside the playoffs on points. He's ahead of Alex Bowman right now. Of course, Bowman has the win, but that's still very impressive from Buescher, and he could definitely point his way in. After his struggles last season, where we expected a little bit more, he's regained that newfound form and refound that form that we expected from 2019 into 2020. He's found that 2019 form and carried it into 2021. So impressive run by both of the Roush Fenway guys here. And they were just really kind of following one another the entire race, and really impressive showing from both of those guys in this one. Go back to 11th, Chase Briscoe. I think that was probably his most complete drive of the season. When you look at how well Kevin Harvick did in this one, finishing 6th, and you look at his 2 teammates, who we'll talk about in a minute, finishing well back in the pack, finishing last and second to last, respectively. This is a track that we expected a little bit from in terms of Chase Briscoe's performance after his Xfinity Series win here last season. I think that's a pretty solid showing from the rookie there. And I'm hopeful that this can be a confidence booster because it has been a really slow start and rough going for him this season. So I don't think this is, indicative of his talent, his performances so far up to this point, but this is hopefully a sign of things to come and a step in the right direction for that 14 car. In 12th place, Tyler Reddick. I don't know what to think about Tyler Reddick in this one. Had the potential for the driver of the day category that we'll give a little bit later on. If he kept that performance up that we saw through the first stage specifically and into the first part of that second stage before he started to fall back a little bit into the running order and just couldn't quite have the consistent speed that we saw early on. So, I mean, even in his post-race interview, Reddick was a little bit, bewildered, if you want to classify it as that, about how far they really fell off because he felt the car was improving in terms of handling, but other guys were just faster than him. So that's a bit of a story that we've seen from Reddick a little bit, where he starts out pretty strong, gets a couple of stage points, but then couldn't quite execute there in the actual finishing of the actual event. So finishing 12th for Reddick, good. Not great in terms of what he was showing for a large majority of this race. Back to 13th, Joey Logano had a really competitive car in this one. Top 5 caliber for sure, but unfortunately for him, he was caught speeding on pit road on the final cycle of green flag pit stops. Of course, you have to make a pass-through penalty, and then finishing 13th there, finishing on the lead lap, but not indicative of Logano's performance whatsoever, showing that he's been really, really good on the 750 horsepower package this season. So that's a vote of confidence for the 22 camp. Behind him there in 14th place, Christopher Bell. I was really impressed with the 20 car the entire day. He showed very consistent speed. He had a speeding penalty at one point in the race, so he recovered from that. And then unfortunately for him, he got into the wall late in the going, forcing him to pit as well and get a couple of fresh Goodyears on that one to finish out the event. Was the last car on the lead lap, was running inside the top 10 basically the entire day, and Joe Gibbs Racing really came to play in this one. All 4 cars looked really, really solid at one point or another, and unfortunately for Bell, didn't get at that top 10 that he definitely deserved. But, he was passing cars, looked like he had good maneuverability in the 20 car, and, unfortunate there for him to not get that top 10. Then we go to the next one behind him here in Rosh Chastain, a really weird one in terms of the strategy in stage 1 there, where he stayed out, was the only car to pull off this strategy. I don't even know if you want to classify that as pulling it off, but he decided to stay out, try to catch a caution, get some track position, despite being in that top 8 to 12 range there before that cycle of green flag pit stops in that first stage. So really unsure of what the strategy call was there atop of the pit box for the 42 car, but it did not work. As we've seen in the past, specifically as recently as Brad Keselowski at Richmond, where they tried to do a very similar strategy. They ended up going a lap down at Rosh Chastain and Brad Keselowski in both of these instances. I don't know if we'll ever see a strategy like this for quite some time for the remainder of the season where they try this, because it has not worked in the both times that we in the 2 times that we've seen it so far. So I don't know what Chastain was thinking there in terms of the strategy call there, but a solid drive overall to recover. Was the first car 1 lap down, getting back to 15th. After falling that 1 lap down with that strategy call, he didn't quite recover there. I don't even think he got back on the lead lap after that. So I don't know. I think it was a good performance by Chastain, but I think he could have probably had more. So left a little bit to be desired there for the 42 car. Next on our list, Eric Jones. Man, just a frustrating kind of finish here for the 43 car. Was running inside that top 15 the entire race. Of course, this is historically his best track on the Cup Series calendar, having not finished outside the top 10, specifically the top 8 in his Cup Series career here. That streak would come to an end today after finishing 18th in this one. He hit the wall under green, forcing him to pit. Recovered to get at least an 18th place finish, which is actually a little bit better than what I thought he would, but there was a lot of cars multiple laps down behind him. So, for Eric Jones, I was expecting a little bit more, but at the same time, I think for a large majority of this race, he lived up to expectations. So unfortunately, he couldn't get the finish, but I was encouraged by what I saw from the 43 car for a large majority of this event. Next, Brad Keselowski, a guy who I had in my fantasy lineup. I was expecting big things out of the 2-car this weekend, starting on pole, of course. Awful performance. Awful performance. Was lost the lead basically straight away to the 4-car there, and then it fell backwards from there on the restarts. Never really had the pace. Got bypassed by multiple cars, and it looked like that thing was just almost uncontrollable for Brad Keselowski behind the wheel. There's a fundamental issue wrong with that car, I think, in this event, and they just didn't really have the time on pit road to adjust it. That's where, for him specifically, you look to practice and qualifying to try and maybe fix that thing up, specifically practice, of course, where they can mess with the setup a little bit. But they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and hope for a better performance come the playoff opener later on this season. Then we get to the really disappointing finishers in this one, and they're all in a row: 35th, 36th, and 37th. We'll start off with 35th with Kurt Busch. Bad luck once again for the 1 car. Didn't get much give from the 23 car there in Bubba Wallace off of turn 4, and that sent Kurt Busch into the inside wall. Ended up catching flames by the time he ended up getting into turn 1, so he was done for the day. And yet another disappointing performance by the 1 car, not indicative of their speed, but then again, they didn't look like they had too much speed in this race on top of that, so it was just insult to injury. And for Kurt Busch, usually the epitome of consistency in this sport, has been almost anything but that this season, and he is mired back all the way in 20th in the regular season point standings, well outside the playoff cut line right now, I believe by over 20 points. So he's going to have some ground to gain up over these summer months here, and that doesn't leave him too much time to get this ship righted. And that's unfortunate to say for Kurt Busch, because the last thing I would want for him to go out is for him to go out on a season like this in his NASCAR Cup Series career where he calls it quits. And, I want to see Kurt Busch stick around at least for another season here, because it just hasn't gone right for him so far in 2021. In 36th and 37th, we have the SHR duo of Cole Custer and Eric Almirola. Basically carbon copy wrecks for both of these guys. Almirola failed pre-race inspection twice, so he got sent to the back of this race, and he didn't even make it 10 laps. One of the paint schemes that I was really looking forward to seeing a lot of in this race, I didn't even get to see 10 laps from it. So got contact from Ricky Stenhouse Jr. from behind after getting tight off of turn 2, sending him into the inside wall, crushing the front end of that very beautiful Winn-Dixie Mark Martin throwback paint scheme. So unfortunate for Almirola to end up 37th. And then for Custer, a very similar incident. Wrong place, wrong time. Got caught up in somebody else's mess with I believe it was Anthony Alfredo off of turn 2. Had nowhere to go, and he ended up basically hitting the exact same spot as Eric Almirola off of turn 2. Both of those guys would be done for the day, obviously way too early on. And a special shout out to Cole Custer's paint scheme, despite not being a throwback, paying tribute to the mothers out there, of course, for Happy Mother's Day. So just disappointing from these two guys. They just have not caught the breaks. That's why I want to give Chase Briscoe the due diligence that he really gets, or he deserves in this race, because he has had such a poor start to this season in his rookie campaign. When you look at the SHR trio of Briscoe, Custer, and Almirola, they are 25th, 26th, and 28th in the point standing. So it just has not gone to plan for them, and they're going to need a miracle to make the playoffs. All those guys, it's going to be win and you're in for sure. They're too far out of the points, and it's going to take a lot for them to even make a playoff push at this point in time. So lots of questions to be answered over there at SHR, and they're going to have to figure those questions out and have a lot of answers sooner rather than later. But that does it for the notable finishers from the Goodyear 400 NASCAR's Throwback Weekend here for the NASCAR Cup Series from Darlington Raceway. Let's give a driver of the day, shall we? There's some good candidates in this one for sure. I think, when you look at the Roush duo there of Chris Buescher and Ryan Newman, I think those are definitely honorable mentions for this award this weekend. Tyler Reddick, as I said, I think he could have been a contender if he stayed up there in the running order in that top 5 to 7 range, but fell back, so I can't quite give it to him. I think a special shout out as well goes to Kyle Busch for the recovery drive after that early spin, gets back to a top 5 finish, but it's all leading up to the guy who won this race. I've gone it with it back-to-back weeks here, but this was just an incredible performance from the 19 car. Martin Truex Jr. gets driver of the day for the Goodyear 400. As I said, led a boatload of laps, 248 of the 293, swept the stages. Dominant car, continues to show his dominance on the 750 horsepower package, and he actually had to work for it at the end of this one, where he had to hold off Kyle Larson for the victory. So you can't not give it to Truex. He was out front by a long ways for a large majority of this race. So props to the team back at the shop and to everybody at the track as well. And of course, Truex behind the wheel for giving us just a dominant performance, a masterful, display of a race car and a driver talent. So that's their driver of the day for this race. Let's give this an overall rating. So it could be mixed on this one. I could see people giving it about a 4.5, about a 5, an average race, 6 even. But I'm going to go a little bit higher maybe than some of you guys. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10 for the Goodyear 400 for NASCAR's Throwback Weekend. I don't know. I just thought the racing itself was pretty good. The Throwback Weekend as well, that's going to give it another notch in its belt for this ranking. And it's good to see a dominant performance like that every once in a while. It's okay to accept that one car is just better than the rest, and that's okay. We have to accept that, it can't be always close racing. Having a guy like that lead, which always surprises me, how a guy can get out to about, a 12-second lead and everybody else is kind of jostling for a position kind of in their own little pack, but he was in his own zip code. So overall, this race it had some elements here early on. Couple of cautions to spice things up, had some strategy. Stage 1 end was phenomenal in terms of that battle to stay on the lead lap. Shout out to Bubba Wallace as well for giving us one heck of a show to try and stay ahead of that 19 car as long as he did. Unfortunately, that did not prevail for him as Kurt Busch ended up getting that free pass position. So kind of what could have been for Bubba Wallace if he could have stayed ahead of Kurt Busch out of that final corner at the end of stage 1. But yeah, I thought the racing was pretty solid. I just like to see the car slip and slide like that. And this is, once again, like one of my favorite weekends of the year. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Same ranking as what I gave Kansas, but for different reasons. At the end of the day, I think Kansas maybe had a better racing product, but I still did appreciate what this event had with this actual package itself. So yeah, that does it for my overall rating. The honorable mentions, the driver of the day, the actual race review for the Goodyear 400, and I think that'll do it for today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at the Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We'd really appreciate it. We're closing in on 100 subs here, maybe in the near future. So if we could hit that, that would be awesome. In the near future, we would really, really appreciate it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the video itself. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. Kyle and I will talk to you later this week to get you set up for Dover. And if you haven't already, go check out our Formula One race recap episode as well. That will be up on the channel. So yeah, and we'll talk to you later this week, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the race, and we'll talk to you soon.